I have been consuming a great deal of Dr. Alan Harrelson's content over the last 2 weeks. I have long considered him to be the only prominent voice of Southern conservatism in the United States, which had a sufficient platform to carry the treasures of that tradition forth into the broader discourse. And I believe that the American Southern tradition has more to say about our present circumstances in the United States and in the broader West than any other single tradition in our modern context. I have been devastated to see Dr. Harrelson insistently decide not to offer any genuinely Southern insights into the nature of the unwilling transformation that our societies are currently experiencing, which arises as a consequence of uh, uncontrolled immigration from civilizations which are foreign to and hostile toward our own. Um, I consume a great deal of content coming out of Western Europe, in particular Great Britain, and it is quite obvious to see that the British people are being dispossessed of their own ancestral homeland by primarily radical jihadis and those of Muslim persuasion and primarily Arab and North African ethnic extraction, who are explicit in their desires to conquer the British Isles in the name of Allah. I also see the extraordinary influx of foreigners to our northern neighbor, Canada, chiefly those of Indian descent or Indian extraction. And I see a completely indiscriminate immigration approach coming from successive American governments, including to some extent our own at present, with the new policy being announced with regard to the admission of 600,000 Chinese students to our universities, and a general lack of will to fully enforce our existing immigration laws. I am almost as unfamiliar with Nick Fuentes as Dr. Harrelson professes to have been prior to the last 2 weeks. I have probably watched no more than an hour or an hour and a half of Mr. Fuentes' content. And I don't say this to distance myself from Nicholas Fuentes or to uh, in any way disavow those issues which he is known to champion. I only say it to demonstrate that my perspective has not been significantly influenced by that of Mr. Fuentes. Uh, my education, by the grace of God, has been good. I have had the blessing and the opportunity to interact with a number of institutions which I know Dr. Harrelson uh, values and respects. This includes the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, uh, the Abbeville Institute, First Things Magazine, Chronicles Magazine, and others. I do not disdain prior generations. I desperately desire for them to weigh in on the reality of our present circumstances in the Western world on a demographic basis in a way that is honest and that helps my generation, which does care but does not know, to tie our understandings and our concerns to an articulate and venerable tradition. I cannot bear to see the extinction of Western civilization. I cannot bear to see the extinction of American civilization. I cannot bear to see the extinction of Southern civilization. It is a unique thing. Uh, it is a delicate growth, in the words of Edmund Burke, and it is quite vulnerable to indiscriminate decisions and the damage that those can wreak. I do not endeavor to espouse what Dr. Harrelson denounces as a white nationalist perspective. I believe in American civilization. I believe in the uniqueness of the United States as a particular historical outgrowth of Western civilization, of European civilization. And I believe that we have numerous historic constituent peoples, including, for instance, Native Americans, including uh, Black Americans, including some significant portions of the Latino population, and including white Americans. This does not include very recent arrivals from very obviously distinct and inimical civilizations, including Communist China, including uh, the Islamic world, including Hindu civilization. These elements of our current demography are historically unprecedented, or very nearly so in the case of the Chinese. Certainly at this level, they are unprecedented. Um, and the impact that these elements will have on the future development of our country will ensure that we go in a direction which is wholly disconnected from that nation which was left to us by our forebears. I do and will continue to describe myself as a Southern conservative. I do and will continue to describe myself as a traditional conservative. And I believe that sitting by and witnessing and facilitating, or at least acquiescing in, the complete demographic transformation of one's own society is precisely the least conservative thing that one can do. Dr. Harrelson speaks of a very considerable concern for the Constitution, and I would just like to pull out a particular quote, which comes from a man who I know he respects. This is John Randolph of Roanoke, an early 19th century Virginia statesman who was not a fan of the United States Constitution. He was most certainly a Southern conservative and considered to be perhaps the single most prominent and outspoken voice for that tradition. And here's what he had to say of the United States Constitution. You may entrench yourself in parchment to the teeth. The sword will find its way to the vitals of the Constitution. I have no faith in parchment, sir. I have no faith in the abracadabra of the Constitution. I have no faith in it. There never was a Constitution under the sun in which, by an unwise exercise of powers of government, the people may not be driven to the extremity of resistance by force. If, under a power to regulate trade, you draw the last drop of blood from my veins, if you draw the last shilling from our pockets, what are the checks of the Constitution to us? A fig for the Constitution. When the scorpion's sting is probing us to the quick, Shall we pause to chop logic? Shall we get some learned and cunning clerk to say whether the power to do this is to be found in the Constitution, and then, if he, from whatever motive, shall maintain the affirmative, like the animal whose fleece forms so material a part of this bill, quietly lie down and be sheared? We are losing our country, and whether we are doing so under the color of the Constitution or in spite of the Constitution, it is happening. I am personally of the belief that we have operated under something of an anti-constitution since the passage of the 14th Amendment, which fundamentally inverted the nature of our government from one in which our federal government had concerns which were almost exclusively externally oriented, uh, and the states handled domestic affairs. Since the passage of the 14th Amendment, the federal government has become the enforcer of a civil rights regime which sets forth that the state governments and the local governments are the chief suspects and purveyors of oppression. Oppression comes from without. Oppression comes from enemy civilizations. Oppression comes from the chief power within one's own society sometimes, but this is most certainly not and has not long been the state governments or the local governments. It is the federal government. And it is to the federal government that we must exercise the greatest degree of our skepticism. I believe that the 14th Amendment very intentionally and entirely subverted the United States Constitution. I believe that we have operated under an imperial and not a republican model since the completion of the United States Civil War. I believe, contrary to what Dr. Harrelson says, that a nation in the Confederate States of America, which set forth as its motto, Deo Vindis, to say that God would avenge them, conceived of itself precisely as a Christian nation. And I see absolutely no incompatibility between the tradition and beliefs of our founding generation and of those generations which came after them for at least the first 80 years of this nation's history, with the idea, which grows in popularity, of becoming once again a Christian nation. If Dr. Harrelson believes that the only thing that unites our country any longer is our common constitution, then I assure you that we are not any longer a country at all. Thank you.